Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to talk about the Ravens' defense in the preseason finale against the Bucs. Talk about what happened in that game, but probably more importantly, what battles really will impact the Ravens in the 2023 season, whether that's going to be the roster or on the practice squad. Joining me to do that is Jake Vogel. Jake, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Ken. How about you?
Great to have you back as always. Good to talk about it. In a lot of ways, good to put the preseason behind us. There's a high stress, fast turnaround kind of time as an analyst that I am usually happy to have end, and now you get back to a more regular schedule during the season.
Absolutely agree with you.
All right, outstanding. A lot of things going on for the Ravens. Some positions certainly were up for grabs. Probably most notably on the offensive line, that was we had decisions made even before by the time the first snap was made, we knew what the call was. But some other things are happening on defense, and some order of deployment questions that certainly answered. Give an insight anyway into what the Ravens are going to do when the season comes along. One thing we haven't gotten to see yet is really much of the scheme they're going to use. We haven't seen any real differences in package. It's been almost all base or nickel so far.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think Todd Monken has done a good job. I know we're talking about defense, but I think he's done a good job on offense of not really showing his cards pretty much at all, even though I think we're seeing some differences between him and Roman, pretty vanilla out there. And I would say the same thing for Mike McDonald. In preseason football, he just, keep the guys out there, play very basic coverages. He does a little bit with his pass rush from time to time, but, there's a lot of tricks left in the bag for Mike McDonald as well.
Yeah, absolutely. They certainly pulled out all the pass rush tricks, not packages, mind you. They never went to even a dime package during that game against the Commanders. But in defending the streak, they were, had a long drive. The defense was completely gassed. The offense really let them down in the fourth quarter of that game. And they had a bunch of 8-man rushes, and they didn't do that at all last year. So it was kind of interesting to see. Well, one thing we saw in this game was that the Bucs played a lot of their first string in this game. And they played him for a while. Mayfield was in there, I think, for 2 drives, which that's not too much, but a lot of the defenders in there for longer.
Yeah, they were. I had a Bucs guy reach out to me before the game asking about what the Ravens were going to do as far as starters go. And I told him the same thing that it has been for the first couple weeks of the preseason. Harbaugh and the coaching staff is not really putting the starters out there. You'll see some heavy rotational players, maybe for a series or two. But the cemented starters on this roster weren't going to play, and that's what we saw yesterday. So it's definitely interesting strategy, and I think in terms of the competitiveness in this game, you see a little bit of that advantage for the Buccaneers, considering they started Baker Mayfield and Chris Godwin was playing. He scored the first touchdown for them. And then you also had Kyle Trask, who was, a legitimate competitor to Baker Mayfield for the starting quarterback job, play the rest of the game, I believe. The top 2 quarterbacks versus the Ravens playing their 2/3 and then their number 4 quarterback for a lot of that game kind of makes a difference.
Yeah, it does. I don't begrudge any other team playing however they want to deploy during the preseason. You want to take some risks with your first-string talent, you go ahead. And you do so at your own peril, of course. The Ravens did dramatically lose snap count in this game. It did feel like for a lot of the game, they were under intense pressure. They had problems on their offensive line and with some talented Bucs defenders making their presence felt.
I would agree with that. You see some struggles from some players we'll get into, even though we're talking about the defense, for the Ravens offensive line, Saleh was not having the greatest preseason, and that continued into this game. But yeah,
lots of problems across the way. We'll get into a lot of that tomorrow night when we talk about the offense. Tonight, as we go on here, we're gonna talk about some individual play. We're gonna get into some roster predictions as we go through this. But I think one of the few jobs that was truly up for grabs in this game, and there wasn't much, especially on the defense. A lot was already decided as far as I observe it, was the cornerback position. They played really three guys in a very conscious effort to get them all about the same amount of playing time and pair them up with each other alternately. So the three guys, of course, were Hayes, Kelly, and Armour Davis. And they each played about 45 snaps, and they each played in pairings with one other, and in a pretty good mix of doing. So they started the game with Hayes and Armour Davis. I'm sorry, with Kelly and Armour Davis out there. And that lasted for 3 drives. And then they went to Armour Davis and Hayes. And that lasted for about another 5 drives. And then they went to Hayes and Kelly again. So Kelly played first and last. Armour Davis played first and second. You understand? Interesting way to look at it. Stevens, Seymour, Darby, all bubble wrap. There was some talk that we'd see Darby a little bit in this game. Yeah. Surprised at all by the
I'm not surprised that Darby didn't play. We're talking about a player that had an ACL injury last year, right? In around October.
Yep.
If I remember correctly. The Ravens have a lot of experience with ACL injuries, and that's less than a year ago that he had this injury. And it's amazing that, he's healthy enough to practice and, got onto the Ravens team in general. I do not feel any sort of negative way that the Ravens didn't get him on the field in the preseason. I just wouldn't want to risk injury. If an injury is going to happen, it's going to happen, but you'd rather have it. You don't want it to happen, period. But in a meaningful game, maybe he can do something. I was not surprised to see Darby not in there.
One guy who did play some, and I think you could consider it a little surprising, is Ardarius Washington. Nothing left to prove, in my opinion.
Right.
Clearly has won the slot job, and the Ravens don't really have anybody to back him up.
Yep. Definitely agree with that. I didn't think he was going to play, but I'm glad that he got out of the game healthy by all accounts. So that's a good thing. And I know that we're going to have to be in wait and see mode on what happens with Pepe Williams, whether that is he makes the 53 and immediate to IR. I doubt that they would just put him on the IR and end his season, just because injuries happen in the secondary all the time, and they might need him later in the year.
They have several players who, if there is any kind of minor injury, even between now and in practice, whatever it might be, between now and I guess it would have to be Tuesday. No. It doesn't even have to be that soon. They can make their handshake deals and get people onto the roster. And we're gonna need to talk about the handshake crew in some degree. I guess now is not a bad time to do it, but they have 4 guys. They're all defenders who are on the roster who are handshake guys, and those are Worley, Seymour, and the 2 defensive linemen,
Urban.
Blackson and Urban.
Yep.
Yeah. And all 4 of those guys potentially would be cut before on cutdown day, and then would be back on the roster prior to week 1. And I think there's a pretty good chance for between 2 and 4 of those to occur. It might be all 4. But the Ravens will need 1 spot for Humphrey, because I presume the Ravens will commit to not having him available for the first 4 weeks, although that is a significant commitment. Where are you on that one?
I'm kind of on the fence on what they're going to do with Humphrey. They know more than any of us how serious that injury is and kind of what that timeline would be. I somewhat lean that he will go on IR after the initial cut down. that'll free up a spot so that they can be more competitive during those first few weeks. You know, if he's going to miss 3 weeks versus 4, I mean, I feel like you might as well put him on IR. Just give him that extra week to get healthy. And the other guys there are some other names that I would consider to go on that IR as well, but they may not be as clear-cut injuries. So that's a little bit more.
We'll save this for the gamesmanship that goes on with that. Yes, we'll save this for the second half of the show because I think that's when we're going to end up getting to the roster calls. We'll do some of the individual stuff in the first part, but I want to get back to the cornerback battle here because the 3 guys who are out there are going to be a very tough decision for the Ravens. They present a really tough question for them, and they've got 5 cornerbacks who I would project are going to be on the opening game roster, and then probably a spot for 1 more, and you could argue that there'd be a spot for 2 more, or there may be a spot on IR behind that, but should be on week 1, should be Darby. I think Seymour will be back. If you're bubble wrapping him now, you're certainly going to have him back. Brandon Stevens, I think, is their number 3 outside cornerback at this point. Ardarius Washington, their slot corner, is certainly going to be on the team. And then we hope Rock Ya-Sin is available for opening day. It certainly seems like it. He's back at practice now, so it seems like there's a pretty good chance of that. That still leaves at least 1 spot for a cornerback. Perhaps I'm not including Humphrey in this group because you're saying he's probably not going to be on the opening day roster, but he won't be an opening day active. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
But he might eat that spot if he's an opening day on the roster at all.
Yeah. So are you talking about game day, like game 1
game day?
Okay.
Seymour will be cut.
Yes.
But then return.
The name that you didn't mention that I have on my list is Jalen Armour-Davis.
Yeah, so I think he's in the battle, and that's why he's with the other 3 that's really battling for this fight. So Jalen would be your next guy of those 3 that you would keep? Okay.
Yes.
I think that's the way the Ravens look at it. And I it's not that I am saying no. I just think he still remains a developmental corner from all I've seen this summer. I think he still is looking like never finds the ball in the air, has good speed, good basic characteristics to play cornerback, just absolutely nothing in the way of experience. And you look at all the guys they have, even the young guys. Tay Hayes had played something like 2,000 snaps in college. To give you a relative idea, Jalen Armour-Davis played something like 700.
Wow.
At Alabama. It's just enormously different. And then, of course, Jalen Armour-Davis has made up for it by playing nothing in the preseason, in 2 years and 50 snaps of regular season play. So this was literally his first ever preseason action against the Bucs this week.
Right. And that's all good points, especially if you're talking about like just game day activation. But as far as being on the roster, I would expect him to still be there for the Ravens.
Mm-hmm. Would you consider he can't practice if he goes on IR, so it kind of ruins some of the developmental value of the thing. But if he develops a minor injury between now and cutdown day, or he already has one coming out of this game, would you consider putting him on a temporary IR where at least gets him 3 weeks to practice?
Yeah, absolutely. When we get to that part, I'll tell you the guys that I have for that kind of thing.
Terrific. Okay. I thought it's going to be very difficult, the decision they have at the cornerback for the last spot, because the order in which I believe the Ravens would like to keep these guys, which I believe is J.A.D., Kelly, then Hayes, because I think they think we just picked up Hayes off waivers. He's played for, I think this might be his 8th franchise and his 9th stint with the franchise. And in addition, he's been drafted by the Birmingham Stallions of the USFL, and he's the guy has already been around in a 3-year career. Incredibly decorated coming out of Appalachian State, by the way. Great defensive back in college, but it is a guy who nobody really seems to trust, even though he held opposing quarterbacks to a 2.8 rating this preseason. 2.8
Wow.
quarterback rating. So one interception. It was like 3 for 9 in terms of completions or something, and just an absurdly low rating. So he's playing the best of the three. It's not. I don't even think it's close at all. Kelly, give me your thoughts on him too, because he's at least played a couple of games now. He had a very bad game against the Commanders. Against the Commanders, or is it against the first game? I'm trying to remember.
He had an up and down game against the Commanders.
Yeah,
but there were definitely some down moments, and definitely kind of both.
Yeah, I thought he was probably better in this game. I thought he made a little recovery, but definitely had some bad moments where he got lost in coverage against the Commanders. And he did not look terrible in that first game, but he only played 17 snaps and it was very late. So that was the issue with it. There are things about Kelly that look like a cornerback, and there's other things from his college tape that I really didn't like him at that point because his statistics were so utterly horrible in terms of giving up 8 yards a target in college. That's just not a draftable cornerback level.
No, that's the kind of level where you'd say, can I have that corner guarding my receivers every time? Because 8 yards per target for a wide receiver is pretty good in the NFL.
And fantastic for a quarterback. So
Yep. So it's difficult with him. I think you have seen, some of that ability to bounce back from negative plays. That's a positive. I would say there's a mixture of things going on with him. I don't know how much of it's physical and how much of it's mental. His change of direction seems to be an area that he is limited athletically, and that's not good for a corner. Mm-hmm. But some of that could be his ability to recognize routes from the receivers, awareness on the field, where he is, and what kind of help he has, and among some other things. So I think that can be corrected to some degree. I think he'll play faster when he's not thinking so much, and that might be some of it as well. So I still say he makes the roster, but it is challenging when he doesn't look like somebody you want out there.
Yeah, and I think the Ravens can carry one of those. I don't think they can carry two. So we'll see how this goes with JAD and Kelly being a couple guys. And right now, I mean, Hayes looks like the best of the three, no doubt about it, in terms of where he is right now. He's more experienced. I would kind of expect that. You get a big payoff potentially from either Kelly or JAD if they can get it turned around. Hayes is now a third-year player, but Kelly, of course, is a rookie, so you have 4 years with him, and you want to take that advantage. Any of these other guys, including guys that could get for 1 year. Another name that came up today again is, why don't we just pick up Greedy Williams? He'd be pretty close to the vet minimum at this point. He's got all the size you'd want and whatnot. He hasn't played all that well in the NFL. Not terribly, but just not that well. And is he a guy that you would want to stick out there because he's got that aircraft carrier size and give him a chance? And I don't know what other off-field or in-building concerns there are about Greedy. I really don't know what got him cut by the Eagles. They're very deep at cornerback, but I really don't know what the problem was.
Yeah, that's a tough situation. When a guy gets cut this early, this was like prior to the last preseason game, I think. That's kind of a red flag. Yes, on paper, he was a talented player coming out of college. And it seems like it might be an upgrade over some of the corners we have. But it's a little bit alarming when a guy is cut that early, on a talented team that wants to win. Yeah, it's odd. If he was very talented and a strong player right now that didn't have a lot of issues, you would think maybe they would try to get some sort of trade value from him instead of just cutting him altogether. So, yeah, I definitely have my concerns, but at this point, you're just throwing a dart.
I'm trying to see when the Eagles played in week. Okay, so they were one of the early games. They played on the 17th, and he was cut on the 19th.
Okay,
by the Eagles. So and maybe it was a question of he wasn't getting enough playing time. They knew he weren't going to make it. I mean, the Eagles still have too much at cornerback. They could consider trading an Eli Ricks at the back end of their roster. I don't think Kelly Ringo, who's playing the second half, is going to get a lot of playing time this year at least. And that would have been one of the questions: is would the Eagles be interested in a trade for Patrick Queen and give up Kelly Ringo in the process? That'd be pretty exciting. Frankly, as a Georgia guy, I bet you'd bet on that.
Yeah, he was a guy I liked a good bit coming out of Georgia. So I would be very interested in that. I heard you talk about that on another pod, and I was kind of digging that idea. But at this point, as we're kind of getting into the roster stuff, I would say Patrick Queen's on this team. I think it'd be really odd, or not odd. I just think it's very unlikely for them to trade Queen, at the last minute. I think he's going to be part of the plans for this 2023 season, unless there's some sort of mid-season trade like Eric DeCosta likes to make to upgrade somewhere else.
Yeah, and those are usually not player for player. Those are usually draft pick for player when they occur. Once in a while, you have a blockbuster, and the Clinton Portis deal was the big one. Was it Clinton Portis and Champ Bailey were in the deal at the same time? Might have been.
They might have been, yeah.
Yeah, so I know it was a big deal with Clinton Portis involved. So when it happens, it's a blockbuster. Well, we'll see how the cornerback play breaks down. I just thought it was interesting in terms of deployment that they got those guys out there when they did, and deployment. It tells you a lot during the preseason. We'll go to some other positions and what happened there, but Orlando Blackson is a guy that a lot of people aren't 100% sure is on the roster, but he played the first 4 drives of the game and then he was out. There's not much of a bigger tell than you're making the roster than they get you out early in the last preseason game, or they don't play you at all.
Yeah, or they don't play you. Yeah, that's definitely.
And Urban and he got basically the same treatment. Actually, Blackson did played a couple snaps on the 5th drive, it looks like, as well. And Urban played a couple snaps on the 4th drive, but they were both out in the first half. I think they're clearly in the Ravens' plans as the 5th and 6th defensive linemen. Mm-hmm. And I think it's smart to have 6 defensive linemen on the roster, which is one of the questions that will naturally come up. Do you just want to only have 5 and try to, have the other one come out? But it's because it's a limited size and shape pool, more limited than some other positions like wide receiver or cornerback or running back, say, you want to have your guys rostered on that, your depth rostered in terms of the defensive line.
Yeah, completely agree with you there. Yep.
Better to have them be game day inactives.
Yeah, and a name that is a little bit of a throwback that I saw on Twitter, I believe today, was Justin Ellis. Jelly recently got cut. So,
oh my God, he's still kicking around?
Yeah, I didn't know.
It's been 4 years since they picked him up off the street.
Yeah, I don't know if he still has it, but that's another guy that the Ravens could go to if they're in a tough position.
I mean, the Ravens practice squad is often the place where people go to find the linemen, but it wouldn't surprise me if Kaim Caesar is the guy. He didn't play too badly in this preseason, I didn't think. Showed some things as a pass rusher, a little bit as a run defender, and he has the right body type in terms of the extra size they like to play that position. But hopefully that doesn't come up at all this year, because those 2 players are incredibly important to the Ravens. Agreed with you. Yeah. All right. Well, let's see. Otherwise, on the defensive line, the guys who replaced, I guess I was a little surprised to see Travis Jones play as long as he did. I kind of, I'm happy that I haven't heard anything about him getting hurt, and I'm glad he got out of the game at halftime. It's actually a little surprising to me that he played that long. Agreed. Yeah, that was very surprising to me. I mean, I think he solidified himself at this point of being a pretty big part of this defensive line. So I was surprised to see him get as much run in the 3rd preseason game. Yeah, I mean he's clearly one of their big 4, and a lot of the flexibility of this defensive line rotates around Travis Jones. It's what can he do at 3 tech. How can you manufacture those one-on-ones? And, a year we've already seen and been very disappointed. I think I speak for a lot of Ravens fans in terms of what we've seen from outside linebacker in terms of the pass rush in this preseason. Yep. Yeah. I would agree with that. And I think, that just, magnifies
the importance of our interior defensive linemen getting home. And Travis Jones is going to be a big piece of that on the early downs. Maybe he gets involved as the year goes on in those, third down obvious passing scenarios for offenses. But, it's going to be Matabike, Broderick Washington, Travis Jones, and even Michael Pierce to some extent, as well as the occasional Brent Urban pressure, getting his hand up, batting some balls down, and maybe getting a sack or two. So those guys are going to be huge. And then what they can do to create room for Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith as well from the second level to get home. That's another big piece of our pass rush.
I think that's really a huge key, but Jones himself is quite the penetrating athlete. And whenever you can set him up, there's a lot of ways to set him up with a one-on-one move, with a one-on-one opponent,
Sure.
a one-on-one matchup. And you can do it by just putting him at 3-tech. You can make it very difficult for them to block him with two men. Almost always the 3-tech is straight up on a guard. And for that to happen, they got to commit to playing Pierce at the 1 and him at the 3, which one of those two is only going to get single teamed, and it's going to be a pretty good deal. Beyond that, even if he's at the nose tackle, you can still get him some one-on-one matchups, and you can manufacture them against the center or against the guard by where you bring an additional pressure up the middle. So if you're willing to commit another pass rusher there, then he effectively has a one-on-one matchup manufactured for him by that, which he could potentially use to great impact. And if you can get him in a situation where they have the double team started and then you bring a delayed blitz, usually it's a disadvantaged block that's left with him. That's kind of the way
Right.
the under guy on stunts typically, and I know you know this, but I'm just explaining to the other people out there, the under guy on stunts usually has the better opportunity, better than the looper. The looper is actually peeling somebody off. So you think of the under guy as sacrificing himself to set a pick, and sometimes that's true. Sometimes he's the one who creates an advantage for the looper. But typically, one block peels off, and that under player then is just tremendously advantaged in terms of his path to the quarterback.
Yep, agreed with that. And I think it could get really exciting. We've talked about it a little bit, and you've talked about it with some other people. The packages with Michael Pierce and Travis Jones on the field at the same time. That just is very enticing, what they can do against the run. And then when teams are in the passing situations, just that pocket compression should be able to help those edge rushers and create some really big opportunities. So,
all right, looking forward to that for certain. Then we saw basically Caesar, Botts, and Nichols take over. Those three guys played the entire second half, and they really played from about the third drive of the second quarter. They were on the field together and doing things. And we saw a few good plays. Trey Botts picked up his first sack. Great pick by Caesar. That was terrific to see. Let's move on to outside linebacker. Now, this was a really interesting deployment choice here. So we saw Tavius Robinson play some early, but Tavius Robinson got sat down after the third drive of the second quarter, not even till halftime. He only started playing on the second drive of the first quarter. Moon pretty much was in opposite either Tavius Robinson or Ajabo for most of the first half. And they did bring in Kelly Sanders towards the end of the half. But the guy who stayed on the field a long time is David Ajabo, who was actually in rushing the passer situationally all the way to the end of the third quarter. What does your spidey sense tell you about that?
It's not a good sign that he's getting that much run, but there could be a lot of things going on here. He's practically a rookie this year. He got a little bit of playing time last year. He did have a little bit of an injury in training camp that held him out for a little while, and maybe he's trying to get back from that. There's just a lot of things going on, and it's tough to say that this means too much. Like, he can't become this impactful pass rusher this year. But as of right now, what we've seen through the preseason, it hasn't been very good. And I think a lot of that is him kind of overcompensating for the lack of edge setting and run defense that he had against the Eagles, trying to make amends for that failure in the first preseason game. And now it seems like he's lost his way a little bit as a pass rusher and maybe some of that mojo. But I don't completely understand why he was getting so much run, but maybe they're just trying to get his feet wet, see if he can shake off the rust a little bit, and I don't know, figure it out.
I think that's what it's got to be. And if that is a problem, and I noted it too, I said so in my article last week, was that I thought there was a overcompensation that was basically keep him from using his A moves, using his A penetration. And maybe we saw him try more of that in the first game, and that he ran himself out of position a few times, and it didn't look that good. He's only had one pressure this preseason as I've scored it. And that's real, but that was just a simple bull rush pressure in the second game, I believe. So it wasn't anything, nothing special, nothing that requires the Ravens to hire Chuck Smith or even to use a first-round draft pick on a guy or second-round draft pick in Ajabo's case. What I'm just disappointed about is I think in this game they tried to put him in situations pass rush situations as opposed to run situations to maybe acclimate him to what his job will be this year, because I do not see this guy out there on rundowns. I think they got Jadeveon Clowney. I think, a pretty classic edge setting character who will be there for most of the season. They've got Tyus Bowser. I think they really want him more for passing situations this year to make sure that their pass rush can deliver on the flexibility it's had in the past with him dropping. But they don't have that other.
Film Study is brought to you by Factor. With the busy fall season just around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for those jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy. Then get back to crushing your goals. Refresh your healthy habits without missing a beat. And with Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in all of our meals. This August, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door and ready in just 2 minutes. No prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/Ravens50 and use code Ravens50 to get that 50% off. That's code Ravens50 at factormeals.com/Ravens50 to get 50% off.
Sam linebacker currently, not among the guys who are going to be on the roster, because it ain't Clowney. There's a question of whether he's a defensive end or an outside linebacker, but he's not a dropper.
Right.
It's not Ajabo. It's not Tavius Robinson. I think we've seen that pretty clearly. Both of them are situational pass rushers. And it shouldn't be Oweh, because we need him to become the next great pass rusher for this team.
Yep.
Yeah,
I completely agree with that. Honestly, it feels like at this point the Ravens are going to try to do something different from what they have done in recent years with the Sam linebacker.
So just give up on some of the flexibility derived from the Sam linebacker and try for more four-man rush?
I think so, especially while Bowser is, healing and, coming back from whatever his knee situation is. I think they're going to more kind of split that role up through multiple people. And in those passing downs, I think they're going to be more straightforward. It's a four-man rush. You're not going to see as much dropping from that guy on the Sam side. That seems like the move to me. If it's something else, I would be surprised.
Yes, I don't disagree with that. I think there's a real good possibility that they're going to need to. Last year, trying to make Oweh into what Bowser was really hurt Oweh, I think, in terms of his development, but also in terms of his productivity last year. And He had a decent pressure year. People, get on him about the sacks, which is appropriate, but he had a decent pressure year. And I just like to see him, that be the focus this year for him, where he's trying to figure out how to beat that tackle one-on-one. We had one very interesting edge situation in this game, and that was Trenton Simpson inserted on the edge for one play. Now, there was actually more than one play where Trenton Simpson was lined up outside of an outside linebacker. So I'm not talking about that. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about in place of an outside linebacker. There was one play late in quarter 3 where he was on doing that. And interesting to see. Definitely something I thought he was not the appropriate guy for. But if they don't have Tyus Bowser, maybe Simpson is a guy who can help you a little bit in some situations where you might want a different kind of a look at Sam.
Right. Yeah. I think he has a while to go right now. He seems like he's developing, which is completely fair. He's missed a good amount of time in training camp with his injury. So I think he will end up helping this team during the season. But right now, they have the 2 linebackers, Roquan and Patrick Queen, and they have enough pass rushers that I don't see him getting on the field too often.
All right. Definitely, we saw some things from Simpson we'll get into in the second half of the show that I thought were very interesting otherwise. Kelly Sanders played the second half. I thought he played pretty well. He did miss a couple tackles, but I thought otherwise he looked pretty good. He was one of the people not being fooled by boot plays in this game that I thought was nice, and we can get into that a little bit later. But in terms of deployment, I guess those are the major issues here. Inside linebacker, kind of a similar set of deployments. We had Phillips and Harrison playing together for pretty much the whole first half. Yeah, it looks like the whole first half. Welch might have been in there a play. We have him noted there, and I did not actually go back to check to see if he actually entered in the first half for a play on the second drive. If it was an equipment issue of some sort that he was in there for, because it would have been for Harrison. But in the second half, it was a combination, like it was last week, of Welch, Ross, and Simpson in different pairings on a within the series even basis, but by series as well in terms of making sure they all got some playing time.
Yep. Yeah, I saw the same thing with the linebackers. He actually looked pretty good in this game, Welch did. But that inside linebacker is going to be interesting when we're talking about the roster breakdown, because some pretty good players aren't going to make this team.
The Ravens draft late they don't draft. They claim late in the waiver order. So one of the things I'd like to see them do is, if you're going to cut a Welch, see if somebody wants to trade you a guy they're cutting who you think might otherwise be a waiver claim. It makes all the sense in the world to trade a player like that, get a little something for him. You don't really want to trade a conditional 7th even for a lot of these guys. But if you're going to cut them, I don't really see the downside to letting a player like Welch go. About the only thing I could say is I really wouldn't want him going to certain opponents who are going to play the Ravens early in the season. I don't think I'd want to see Welch going to the Bengals and giving them a bunch of hints about how we run our special teams. But otherwise, I'm pretty much fine in terms of who you trade him to, and you essentially move up your claim from somewhere towards the back end to number 1 by by trading that player, and it's a creative way to use your surplus talent. If there's a way they can get anything for, honestly, any of their inside linebackers not named Queen, Simpson, or Roquan, I think I'd be in favor of it. And that means even if you trade Harrison, if you trade Phillips, the difference is not great enough between them and the other player, particularly when you multiply by how much they're going to play, that you can't give them up if you're getting something in return.
Agreed with that.
Yeah. All right, Josh Ross, we'll talk about him a little bit in the second half. Honestly, seems to be headed back to the practice squad as far as I'm concerned, but a guy who we enjoy seeing him play every preseason, it seems like. But there were some things that didn't go exactly right yesterday that we'll talk about. I think we talked about the cornerback deployment a little bit. Surprised, I think, like you were, that Ardarius Washington continued playing into the third quarter. I didn't. He played the first half. And then we saw Corey Mayfield come in the slot in the second half to play along with the other pairings. Really, it's just those three cornerbacks with two different slot corners, Washington and Mayfield. That was the deployment for the entire game. Only 5 guys played corner for the Ravens.
Yep. It gets tough when you're getting to that last preseason game. You only have so many guys that you can put out there because a lot of players are sitting at that point.
I thought it was interesting. One of the guys who they could have stuck back at corner for a little bit of time, but they were using him at safety, Jeremy Lucien, was a guy they could have stuck Darryl Worley back for some more time at corner, because there's a reasonable chance that they asked Darryl Worley to play cornerback at some point this year. He probably makes the team as a safety, but a pretty reasonable chance he ends up playing corner,
right,
at some point in some game this year. No. All right, safety. We'll move it on. Geno Stone played with Worley for 5 drives. It looks like into the beginning of quarter 2, but they didn't stay on the field the whole time. Those guys both clearly being given a white glove treatment at this point. Worley, the amazing first game against the Eagles that really won it single-handedly with a bunch of high-leverage plays in a row. I know he had some missed tackles in that game, but he was unbelievably right where the other team didn't want him to be for those last drive-ending plays. And then Geno Stone out there as well. Job's not in any danger. I didn't think he played particularly well in this one, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Lucien and Houston Carson back there, and I always have to check myself and see if I'm saying those names in the right order.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like having multiple first names or multiple last names. You often get it wrong. But I have some things to say about Lucien in terms of his general season. But anything at safety about the deployment that says anything other than these 4 safeties are on the team and these 2 are not?
No, I don't think there were any surprises in that. Honestly, when you're getting down to the breakdown of the roster, I only have 3 safeties on my initial 53, but there's a reason for that.
Yeah. Yes, you're right, and I agree with it too. We'll get to that in just a moment. We'll start on this half of the show. We're going to go through the defensive line and the outside linebackers. Then we'll cut it off. We'll take a little break, come back, and record part 2 of the show.
Okay.
But let's talk about the interior defensive linemen in this game. We've had a little bit of discussion so far, but in this game in particular, what did you see that you liked? Pick a player, talk about him, and then I'll pick the second player.
So I like all of the depth players. Travis Jones is the obvious guy to talk about. So to me, he stands out in every game that he's played this preseason. There were points in the game where I felt like he was not necessarily getting overpowered because he's one of the strongest guys on the field, but he was just missing some things because he was consistently getting double teamed as the player, getting one arm out there trying to make a tackle. He was missing tackles like that, but it wasn't a real fair opportunity for a tackle. So I'm not sure how PFF graded him last night. I have not looked at that yet, but I thought he played well, penetrated. He had some splash plays for sure, but kind of shows you more of that ability to play 3-tech than an obvious nose tackle, full time.
Yeah, it looks like he had a pretty average game according to them last night. Wait a minute. Yeah, pretty average game overall, but they do have him for some missed tackles, a couple of missed tackles here, It looks like. So I think I had him for 1. I'll have to go back to my article and see how I had it. But, there's missed tackles are certainly definition-based. There's almost nothing that would be more definition-based, and so sometimes you run into that, and it's no big deal. I have him missing a tackle at the line of scrimmage. Q2-825 is the one I have. Did have a nice pressure of Trask when he was not fooled on a boot right. There was a lot of that. And by the way, Trask, an interesting quarterback to go against, and kind of represents a good challenge for the Ravens because they run a lot of boot plays. And you want to get practiced at having the backside edge defender know what he's doing at a boot play, and he's the live wire there. That backside edge defender is critical to get right after the quarterback immediately. So he's got to stay at home. He's not got to be fooled. He can't go diving in after the running back trying to make a big scraping play across the backfield to make a tackle. So he can't bite on that. And what makes it more difficult is Tampa Bay runs them in both directions. So the Flacco boot, I'd say 95% of them, maybe only 90, but it's at least 90, were zone block left, naked boot right, ZBL, NBR on our score sheet. And the reason is that right-handed quarterbacks really need to boot right in order to keep their feet right to throw to the three levels of the field. And Trask apparently is able to boot left fairly effectively because I would say they booted over half the time to the left side where, the zone block is going to the right and the boot's headed to the left. And the Ravens edge defenders were still very good about staying home.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Something that is often talked about in regards to the Ravens and Lamar Jackson is the ability to have boot plays and kind of how it affects teams. And with somebody as athletic as Lamar Jackson, we haven't been able to see as many uses of that play because the effectiveness might be significantly lower just because the edge defender is not tricked on the play versus a more average athletically gifted quarterback in terms of their mobility might fool the defense.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're saying that edge defender is always keyed in on Lamar, but if it's Joe Flacco, not necessarily so. And they still got pretty used to that boot by the end of the tenure, particularly the divisional foes. I felt like they were on the boot all the time for Flacco because they did it so often.
Right.
But with Jackson, it just never works, or it never really gets him free. He can make it work,
right?
But it never really gets him the kind of unpressured look down the field that you hope for, because that edge defender is always thinking Lamar, what's he doing, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so that's good about Jones. So I'll move on. I'm very happy with what Jones has done this preseason. Excited to see what he does in the regular season, but I don't think I have much more to add that I haven't said with gobs of praise in those first two episodes. So I'll move on. I'll talk a little bit about Brent Urban, who I thought had a pretty good game here. Urban is a key piece for the Ravens, particularly in terms of their run defense. When they want to play a 5-tech, he's a good choice. They can do it with Washington also. He's perfectly fine as well. They actually both have some similar characteristics of being able to deflect passes while having different body types, in terms of Urban being more of a taller, thinner guy and Washington being more of a stouter guy, but who nonetheless has very active hands and gets them up. Urban, I think, has been an outstanding space denier in the run game, and he continued to show some of that in this last game. I think he only had one tackle in the game, might have only been one assist. I'd have to go back and actually look at this, but it wasn't a stat stuffer of a score sheet he threw out there. And yeah, I thought he was effective in terms of denying space to the offense. Yeah, just one assist. That's it for Urban in this game, and I did have some plays noted where he'd done some things. Now, I do on my score sheet, but I didn't put any in the thing. I think he's not in any danger in terms of his role this year. The Ravens are making it clear by the early exit that he's part of the deal, but I think he probably has a handshake agreement come Tuesday for whatever.
Well, I agree, and that kind of stinks for a player like Urban, because around this time of year, it almost feels like making the initial 53-man roster is a little bit of like a prideful thing, and he's a player that just hasn't been able to experience that very much, even though he's a player that many of us in Baltimore love, if not all of us, and thinks he deserves that sort of like stamp of approval. You're on the roster, you don't have to worry about being cut. But he's at the point in his career where he can be cut and come right back to the team. And, if they want to throw him a couple extra dollars his way for agreeing to do that, then, if I were in that position, I would be fine with it as well.
Yeah. I think he understands the business of football and being a survivor in the NFL and making the additional, 1.1 to 1.3 million. I actually don't know what his salary is on a yearly basis. I mean, it's a lot more than he'll earn in his next job, whatever that is, we would figure. I mean, maybe he'll be very successful at some point, but it's going to take him a while to get there, as it takes any of us to get to that kind of a salary, in our lives. If we, and most of us never make it. Let me be very clear about that. Yeah. With regard to that. So I think he's very reasonable about it. When I interviewed him, he said, he perfectly understands, and that just thought it was smart football to try and expand the roster to 58 men or 57 men. And that it's the right attitude to have. And it's the kind the Ravens are going to want, frankly, from a player like him, who brings a lot of value defensively. They want him on the roster as the last man on their defensive line, or the second to last. And they also want that roster flexibility. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Who's your next guy? Anybody else you want to discuss from this group?
I thought Trey Botts played pretty well at the end of the game. You already mentioned the one sack he had. Anytime that you can finish a play on the defensive line, whether that's cleanup or you're, purely making a play one-on-one, that's something that you have to highlight. Granted, it's coming in the last preseason game against, second, third, fourth string players. So, decent work from him. I'm not sure whether he would be a practice squad guy for us. I'm guessing he would be in consideration, but there are some guys above him in that pecking order, like Nichols, I would say. Mm-hmm. But yeah, pretty solid game. Did some good things against the run, and then that sack at the end of the game was pretty good as well.
Yeah, I think one thing to note about this game is Botts and the rest of them, but Botts played 40 snaps, and that's a lot of snaps to play on the defensive line. And when you think about how the Tampa Bay drives rolled out, they had a bunch of long drives. It wasn't just a bunch of short stuff. So a player like Botts is getting really tired out by that sort of lack of rotation, where they only have 3 defensive linemen to fill 2 spots for most of that kind of a drive. And some of that, they were playing the base defense because they're trying to stop the Tampa run as they're moving down the field and they already have the lead. So that was obviously a higher workload in that second half than it would have been in the first. He was party to 3 tackles. They were all defensive wins. I know defensive linemen tend to get a higher percentage of defensive wins among their tackles. That's still a good number. And that sack was a really nice use of the pick. The next guy I would pick to talk about is Kaim Caesar, because we talked about Botts, but that his crash, it wasn't even between those linemen. It was almost like a block against the first lineman that created a wash play where nobody could possibly get back to block Botts. So it's one of the beautiful pick plays you'll ever see, and a purely unselfish play in terms of no way in hell is he getting any part of that sack as an under.
Right.
It's going to Botts or it's going to no one.
Yeah, you gotta love that unselfishness along the defensive line, and that was a phenomenal play made by him.
And I think I would agree with you. It's maybe only 1 out of 3, but probably 2 of the 3 of Nichols, Caesar, and Botts makes the practice squad. Mm-hmm. Nichols and Caesar each have a kind of a more specific role, some additional experience. That it seems like it could be those 2, but we'll see. Maybe Botts is a guy they like athletically, and they feel like it's. Yeah, I thought he was a little undersized, but I think the Ravens roster now shows him at pretty close to 300 pounds. And let me just look real quickly at what they list him at. Yeah, still only 292. So 6'2", 292. That's a little undersized to be a 3-tech player in the NFL these days, but.
Famously went to the same school as Ryan Jensen. Unfortunately, we heard some bad news about him yesterday on the broadcast. He's out for the year, and he possibly could be done for the rest of his career with that injury. Really sad, but great player in Baltimore that turned it on at the end of his stint with the Ravens and made a name for himself with the Buccaneers.
It's a lot of fun to watch. I can tell you that. A lot of fun to score as an offensive lineman, too, in terms of how he grew throughout his career here. Purely developmental player, really, for a couple of years. Just got a little bit of action. Then he played and he was okay. And then he moved to center and he was great all of a sudden. And that was a lot of fun to watch his growth in that way. Also just really fun to have the Ravens have a big, powerful center for the first time in a long time. Yeah, really got to go back to a player like Matt Burke to find a guy who really fit that role the same way. I have liked what we've seen, by the way, from Sam Mustipher so far this year. I thought he's looked pretty damn good in this preseason. Now, this wasn't the best game. I couldn't tell you if this ended up being a great game for Mustipher or not. I've noted some individual plays. I will say this, as we charted through going the offense, we just did it before we got on the pod here tonight. There were not a lot of pressures charged to Mustipher. Most of it went to other offensive linemen. But he's looked pretty good. He had one play in this game where he blocked 3 players on the same play. Yeah. So that's unusual for a lineman. All right. I think we've pretty much gone through all the linemen. Let's move on and talk about the outside linebacker group. And there's certainly lots of guys to talk about. Who do you want to talk about first?
We could talk about Tavius Robinson, another guy that should be on the roster. At this point, he does seem to be just a situational pass rusher. I think it's just going to be a waiting game with him to try to see how much development he can have over the course of a year, 2 years before we're actually seeing a player that is highly effective in this defense. He hasn't been bad the whole time, the whole preseason, but he's definitely not somebody that you want on the field week 1. And I know we're playing Houston, and some people say, get your guys out there. I heard on one of your more recent podcasts, somebody talking about Todd Monken saving up some of the offense for Cincinnati. And, it's a similar idea with putting Tavius Robinson out there. I just think, he might be a healthy scratch most games this year.
Yeah, that's where I am too. I think he's the most likely deactivation of the outside linebackers on a regular basis here. Now, here's the funny thing here. I don't know what you do if Ajabo continues to not figure it out, because you may at some point try and give him a kick in the rear end and just activate Robinson over him some week.
Sure.
Because they obviously have lots of overlapping skill set. And if one of them is picking up more from Chuck Smith than the other, maybe take a look and you'll see what's going on, because they somehow got to get Ajabo started up this year. It is at this point, honestly, a point of sunk cost with Ajabo, so they can't be too concerned about what they used in terms of the draft pick off. They can be pissed about it if they want to be, but it shouldn't affect their decision on whether Tavius Robinson or Ajabo is the active player. And frankly, with Robinson, since they have 4 years of development available, if they can get him to a liftoff point a little bit earlier by playing him in year 1, that might be the right move. That it might limit Ajabo in some way, but that might be the right move in terms of you get 4 years out of this guy, 3 years out of Ajabo. You got to think about doing more to make sure Tavius Robinson works out this year.
Right.
Just a little bit freaking disappointed though that Chuck Smith has not had more of an impact on the outside linebacker group in particular. Dr. Pass Rush, a lot of things we expected. We still got a whole lot of games to go.
Right.
We just haven't seen in the preseason.
I would say it's too early to say that there's not an impact there. We haven't been able to see Justin Madubuike, Broderick Washington, Michael Pierce in these games, and he's working with those guys, and especially Adafe Owe, who, by all accounts, I haven't been at any training camps this year, but by all accounts, he's having a strong training camp and is looking much improved as a pass rusher. So, I think, with all of those guys, and then maybe a little bit with Jadeveon Clowney, who's not the best pass rusher at this point in his career either, nor has he ever been, but it should be an improvement over some of the things we've seen in the preseason.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think they'll be able to scheme for Clowney to do some things that he hasn't typically had done for him at other places. Like I sure, when he first came up with the Texans, they probably did some things, but they also relied on him to be a one-on-one winner. And they can do some things for Clowney here to try and schematically either get him one-on-one matchups, maybe getting him on the move, maybe rushing him from off the line of scrimmage and doing some other things they wouldn't normally do for players to try and have him make a real impact. But Baltimore does a good job of that. They have for the last several defensive coordinators in terms of, even go back to Pease, I would say, of getting guys opportunities that look a little different than normal. Matt Judon and Tyus Bowser have both been off-ball guys. They've been inside guys. They've been guys who drop to create opportunities for overload on the other side. You could see some of that happening for Clowney. You blitz the slot on the same side as Clowney, you probably put him at a big advantage, or the slot, one or the other.
Right.
So you got lots of good opportunities to get in. And I think the Ravens are, since they do more to try and catalyze that pass rush directly, I think they got a better chance to make that work.
I would agree with that.
All right. I do want to talk a little bit about Jeremiah Moon. I thought that he hasn't been bad at all. I didn't think this preseason. In this game, I thought he played the run pretty decently, had a really nice coverage play over by the right sideline where he reached across the body. We'll always like to see that from an outside linebacker to knock down a pass. But I thought he set the edge pretty well, and I think that's been a fairly consistent point this preseason. Yeah,
I would agree with that. He's somebody that looked pretty good last year in the preseason, and I think he's just kind of continued that into this year. And the other name that has popped up in the outside linebacker competition for the fringe spots would be Malik Ham. I wonder how you would kind of contrast Ham versus Moon at this point.
Either of them have potential to be a Sam linebacker, where I think Kelly Sanders really is more of a rush guy. Sanders, this game, by the way, set the edge pretty well. I don't want to go into him, but I will point people to the article and say, go take a look, because he made a lot of pretty nice plays, and he was right on Trask on those boot plays. He didn't lose him. Good pressure in the game. That was positive. But let's go back to Malik Ham, because I think he's in a lot of ways the more interesting player. He's certainly shown some things as a pass rusher in terms of figuring it out. And some of it's been one-on-one wins. Some of it's been exploiting opportunities that he had for an unblocked rush. So there's been some of both of those. I did look back. He's dropped to cover now 11 times. He sat out this game because of some minor injury, because I'm sure he'd have been in there otherwise.
Right.
But he, to me, he's the most obvious practice squad choice of all for multiple reasons. But the big one being, I think you could possibly develop into a Sam linebacker.
Yeah, I would agree. He shows the athleticism to do that. Like you said, he's dropped 11 times. That's not an insignificant number in 3 preseason games.
2 even.
Yeah. Or 2. Yeah. That kind of magnifies the point that he didn't play in this past one. So interesting player.
I think they were trying to get him out in space a little bit too. So, some of the things you do in preseason, you do it just because you want to see what your players can do. So it might be, they might use him 5 times a game, or they might not if this were the regular season. But I will say this, in the 11 times he dropped, he wasn't even targeted once, which is very nice that he wasn't that guy that the other team tried to go after.
Right.
Now, if this were a regular season game, he'd probably be concerned about going after him and not try to see if their wide receiver could beat somebody one-on-one. No. All right. Let's call it there. And I'll tell you what, we'll take a break and we'll be back for part 2. But before we do that, where can folks talk football with you online, Jake?
On Twitter. I don't care about calling it the other name. And my name on there is @RealJakeVogel, VOGEL. I talk Ravens. I talk Georgia football, NFL, college, you name it. And I always enjoy getting in conversations on there.
All right. Outstanding. Other folks out there, if you want to be on a film study short, you know the deal. Send me a DM. They're always open on Twitter/X. And hit me up. I will get right back to you, and we'll talk about your kernel of an idea. Typically, the more self-contained the idea is, the better. There's lots of rabbit holes we'll go down no matter what. So having a relatively small thing that we can talk about and spend 15 to 20 minutes on is ideal, because I want to try and provide some shorter content. A lot of people can be turned off by 1 hour shows. And I have an awful lot of those. So if you can find the show we can do in 15, 20 minutes, it's a great contrast to what otherwise we talk about here. Jake, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.